Welcome to Happy Path Programming. I'm Bruce Eckel.
I'm James Ward.
Well, hello everybody, and this time we have with us Daniel North, who I met for the first time at a conference in Budapest. I don't know if you remember the year it was. I was like 2015, maybe, something like that.
It was a while ago, yes.
It was a while ago, and it's what kicked off. It's when I talked to JetBrains, and they said, hey, we want you to write Atomic Kotlin, and that whole thing got started. But anyway, I remember you were sitting at another table at breakfast at the hotel, and somehow we got talking, and then I ended up. This was when I used to think that having recovery days when you're traveling internationally was a good idea. I'm not so sure now. But anyway, so it was my recovery day, and I ended up hanging out with you the whole day and going to your presentation. And by the time you were like halfway through the presentation, I was all starry-eyed because it was like, oh my gosh, this guy, look at how he connects with his audience. He's just like really on top of everything. And I don't know. And all of your presentations, which I recently watched, most of the ones I could get my hands on, have this same kind of command of the whole presentation, and you don't have the throwaway words, the ums and all that. So anyway, I was just like super impressed, and that was a really fascinating conference.
What was the presentation on?
I don't even remember.
Oh, good heavens. So Craft and I go back a long way. So what let me just I'll give you a quick heads up on Craft, which is coming up fairly soon actually. It's this one chap, right? This one Hungarian guy. His name's Gergely. Everyone calls him Feo. And what he did, it was a genius piece of social engineering. He created a Google spreadsheet of everyone he would want to see at a conference. And then, with columns of like, yes, no, question mark, maybe, notes, that kind of stuff. And then he emailed this spreadsheet to all of the people. And so now suddenly everyone was looking at a list of all the people they'd want to see at a conference, and they were all seeing that, so and so said yes, and so says maybe, and then, well, if they're going to go, I want to go and see them, I'll sign up. And so what happened was, from a standing start, the first year that the Craft ran, which I think was early 2010s, his speaker lineup was like keynotes of every other conference. And it was just insane, and it went up from there. And it started in like a conference venue in Hungary, in Budapest, and then it moved because it outgrew that, and then it went to there's a palace, on the river in Budapest, and it went to the palace, and then it went beyond that. Now it was too big for that, so now it's there's a railway museum on the edge of town, and he's taken over the railway museum. And so my history with it, I was lucky enough to be one of the first folks on that list, or at least at that first conference. And I've been at, I think, every single Craft except one. So I mean, I could probably go and find you the topic, but my experience just hearing Bruce say that was the adage of never meet your heroes. Is sometimes it's really nice to meet your heroes, because I had no idea until this moment that that's what you thought about my talk.
Oh yeah, I was just blown away. It wasn't, I don't remember the topic. It was just your presentation abilities. And more than that, it was how you thought about things, how you looked at, oh, I see, here's a problem, but let's take a step up, maybe multiple levels, and see what's causing that problem in the first place, the meta of what's causing that problem. And I have a list of ideas that I have about meta problems that I want to bounce off you at some point in this discussion. So, but
funny enough, I actually had as I was saying before we started, press the record button. I had a bit of not a meta thing, but anyway, there's something about feedback loops that I'd like us to chat about. I've no idea where it'll fit in, but let's just put
That's
that
on my list
post
too.
it somewhere.
The whole feedback system. Yeah.
Oh,
But
cool. Okay.
let's start with something simple, which is like the other day I put out a tweet that said, "I'm always focusing on the bear, but it's usually the puppies that bring me down." And I'm talking about, friction and little hurdles and everything. And I'm curious, what little hurdles block you?
Oh, wow. Distraction. Distraction is the little hurdles that block me. So, an obsession with Twitter and saying, okay, well, I'm now going to shut my TweetDeck window and I'm now going to carry on with work. And 45 seconds later, it's open. And I'm sure it wasn't me that opened it, but there it is.
Yeah, for me, it's just like the habit of like I mean to do something on my phone, but for some reason, every single time I look at my phone, I go to Twitter and get lost in Twitter for many minutes, and then I've completely forgot the actual thing that I was trying to accomplish on my phone.
But yeah, I think the smartphone is the 21st century equivalent of what did I come in this room for?
Yeah.
Right. It resets your brain. Okay. All right.
And then you put it down, and then you go, oh, I remember now. I have to make that payment.
And then just recursively, like, go back to Twitter, forget what I was meaning to do.
But someone on the internet is wrong.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, before we get into the other things, let us go into, I actually have this on my list, feedback as the core of a successful structure. And like, because I made the assertion the other day that feedback is kind of what determines whether a system, is ultimately successful or it fails. Is that
you saying we can't get it right the first time?
Well, not only that, but you need to have that, feedback coming in, and in fact, one of the problems, or probably maybe the main problem with so-called dominator hierarchy. I don't know if you've heard the term, but is it self-explanatory what a dominator hierarchy is? Okay, so one of the problems with the main problem with the dominator hierarchy is at every level somebody wants to dominate the level below it, and so the idea of feedback is anathema to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think ultimately those things can only go so far and perhaps ultimately collapse.
So I think, for me, there are two. When you talk about this, there are two clear, separate but related worlds that pop into my head. One is the social feedback model, and the other is a technical feedback model. The social feedback model, by far the most effective, and demonstrably, tangibly, visibly effective counter to this, or model that I've seen that works with this, is the David Marquet. I'm not sure how to pronounce his surname. I've only ever seen it written down. Leader model. So when he talks about turn the ship around. So have you come across turn the ship around?
I've read the book.
You read the book? Fantastic.
I haven't. So yeah, it'd be good.
Okay, so very briefly, this guy, he's an ex-US Navy nuclear sub commander. So, props to the guy, right?
Yeah.
It turns out that all nuclear subs are a little bit different from each other. Each one is a one-off. They're each you have a navy full of snowflakes, and so the idea is that if you're going to captain a nuclear sub, you spend 6 months learning the sub, how it works, all of the mechanisms and whatever, and then you take it out for a 6-month tour. And given that you're a submarine, a successful 6 months tour means you didn't surface, right? If you come up, it's usually bad news. You're usually coming up in order to. So you've now got a bunch of people who are going to spend the next 6 months of their lives in close quarters, and in this very, very high risk, high impact, high pressure world. So that's the context. He's about to take his sub out, and then he gets a tap on the shoulder. Captain Marquet, you've got a reputation of being really, really good at difficult situations. I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And no good deed goes unpunished. we're giving you the worst sub in the fleet. Okay, it has the highest attrition, lowest scores, everything about this sub sucks, and it's not the one you were going to go on. And you start on Monday. So off he goes. And pretty much the first thing he does, he gets on the sub and he introduces himself, and they launch. And he says, okay, full ahead, 2/3. And so his second says, calls down to the engine room, full ahead, 2/3, silence. Oh, what's happening? From the engine room, sir, this ship doesn't have full ahead 2/3. He's like, sorry? This sub doesn't have full ahead 2/3. And he's like, okay. And so he says to the second, he said, did you know that? He said, yes, sir. He said, why didn't you tell me? Because you gave me a command, sir. He said, what if I'd given you a command that was going to kill us all? He said, this clearly isn't going to work. We need to do a different thing. And so he introduced what he called intent-based leadership. So at every point in the hierarchy, you say, I intend to do this thing. Right. So Bruce is the commander. I'm in charge of, say, the galley. Right. I do cooking. So I say, right, Bruce, I intend to make lasagna. And he says, right, that sounds great. I say, I intend to make lasagna and lace it with rat poison. And he says, well, just a minute. Why would you do that? I'm going to challenge that. That's a reasonable challenge. You probably should challenge that. And so if everyone's talking about what they intend to do, then you only ever need to manage by exception. Right? I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you that I know this well enough that I've probably got this. And if you hear something that sounds odd, you get to challenge it. And that model is brilliant because it works all the way down. At any level, your peers, your subordinates, people who report to you, and your superiors can challenge what they're hearing. And exactly what you're saying, Bruce, it creates this feedback. You have continual, but ironically, what you have, the majority of signal is going upwards. It's people saying what they intend to do. And it's the only stuff that comes down from above is the occasional challenge or question.
Well, and that was originally what the hierarchy was supposed to do, was move information upward so people know what's going on and they can make big picture decisions.
And it's not about importance. It's just about depth of, or about breadth of view. Like, if are you managing the entire force in wherever it is, or are you managing half a dozen people on the ground?
Yeah. One of the problems that I see, though, with a hierarchy is that it seems to invite or encourage the people who want to be in power to go into power. And I usually find the people who want to be in power are not the people I want to work for.
Are the absolute least. Well, and also, not just who you don't want to work for, they're often the least suited to it.
Mm-hmm.
The ones who want it the most, because what you want is people who are genuine servant leaders, and what you get is a bunch of narcissist sociopaths. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that sociopathic narcissism is a fantastic set of personality traits to succeed in corporate world. If you're just in it for you.
Right. And I think that's probably because the people who ended up designing it were those people. So it's kind of one of my questions,
right? Yeah.
Is it possible to take the dominator out of the hierarchy? And well, yes, if you have the right person, steering the ship, being the commander of the ship, yes.
Well, so yes and no, because, sorry, go on.
That's very much like the benevolent dictator.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, it depends on the benevolence of the dictator, and it's by definition not going to last beyond their reign or their lifetime.
Well, and this is the same socio-cultural argument against philanthropy. Is should a rich white male billionaire determine who gets good social care? Or should that be a necessary consequence of building the right social system in the first place?
One of the NVC workshop that I've been taking for the last 2 years, one of the things that she brought up was whenever you make a decision, ask, is this good for some people or is it good for everybody?
And just to clarify, NVC, nonviolent communication.
Sorry, thank you. Nonviolent communication, yes. Yes, and that's been kind of going through my head all this time. It's like it's a much harder thing to figure out, or at least with the tools that we have now. Anyway, let me go and find.
So there's like the feedback side, Daniel, on the social side, but then you also mentioned the other side, which is like the technical side or something, right?
So and this is so this came up a few times actually back on the Twitters again over the last few days. And it caused me to spin up what will be, I really hope will actually be a thing, but I fear that it will be just yet another side project that doesn't go anywhere. So if I talk about it publicly on your podcast,
now you're committed.
By the time this airs,
yeah,
there will be a non-zero.
That is a for sure way of getting anything done.
Oh, I can promise you.
I'm being sarcastic.
Well, no, I'm not, right? All of my output in the last, I don't know, some years is invariably as a result of an inbound email. How would you do this thing? Can you help me with this thing? And I end up writing a big comprehensive reply. And I think, actually, that might make a pretty good general useful information. And I put it out somewhere. It might be a challenge. So all of the Cupid work that I've been doing in the last year or so was literally someone said, hey, we're having a meetup about Solid. And what would you do instead? You're clearly not a fan of Solid. What would you do instead? And no one had caused me to articulate that yet. And then pretty much on the back of that, I got invited to speak at a conference, and they said, what are you going to talk about? And I said, well, I'm going to talk about this thing. And those two events put me on the hook to do something actually tangible. Yep. So most of my output is usually a fear of other people's deadlines. I'm very happy for mine to go whooshing past, but I don't like to let people down.
Conferences impose good deadlines on us.
It's true. It focuses.
And the problem is, I'm actually not bad at writing a title and an abstract. I can come up with something reasonably compelling, and then that means, and now I've got to follow through with the talk, which is much harder.
Yeah, and what often happens with me is I write the abstract, completely forget like what it was that I actually wanted to like do, and then a week before the talk I go back to my abstract and I'm like, really, I wrote that? I don't even know what that means. Like now I have to somehow figure out again
what on earth was 4 months ago James thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
And who is this man?
Yeah, that's some kind of inspiration there. Well, okay, that I might as well use that as the jumping off point.
Wait, no, but Daniel's going to tell us about this thing he's committing to doing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, what are you committing?
Well, so this goes back to feedback. So something I want to do when I'm building, particularly when I'm building something exploratory, which is most of the code I ever write. Mm-hmm. I don't know the answers. If I knew the answers, someone already done it. I'll just go use their thing.
And do you use TDD when you're doing this exploratory programming?
I tend to, and I don't obsessively TD. I don't write a test for every single piece of code I'm going to write. Mm-hmm. I think that's useful training wheels. There's a wonderful Stack Overflow answer that's been like, some of them they bake in anthracite or whatever because it's going to become famous. And there was a lovely Stack Overflow question a few years ago called something like, how deep are your unit tests? And it was saying like, how much TDD do you do? Do you test getters and setters and all that kind of stuff? And so Kent Beck pops up and says, wonderfully controversially, I write as few tests as I can get away with because I don't get paid to write tests. And and a million voices cried out. Just, Kent has spoken, and he doesn't write obsessive TDD. We don't understand this. And I think it might have been Kent. Someone used the metaphor many years ago, stuck in my head, of hiking. And if you're walking along reasonably flat ground, you can take quite big steps. And then you get to a steep bit or a very rubbly bit, lots of gravel under your feet. And so you take smaller, more deliberate steps. And you get to a point where maybe somewhere where you're practically climbing. You're taking tiny little steps and there's loads of effort. But then after you've been taking loads of effort, when it levels out again, you don't carry on taking tiny steps. You start you get back into your stride. And you can think of that as the granularity of your tests or your code examples or whatever your language is write the test that helps you think about the next thing. And if you can take a few reasonably big steps reasonably confidently, go nuts. until you can't. And so, and this, funny enough, this was part of the conversation. Was I was talking with, I think it was Joe Rainsberg or someone, lovely, about TDD, and practically simultaneously, he and someone else said, the problem I have with TDD is, especially in a new language, I don't know where to start. I pick up Go and it has this testing package, and I don't know about Go testing, and testing has these things in there, and it doesn't have a cert, which is weird. And the designers of Go said, well, no, we've got if. We've got if, it's perfectly fine, right? If this thing doesn't match your expectation, fail the test. That's what your assert does, right? Yeah, pretty much. Okay, well, you don't need another word then. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Rust has a unit testing thing baked into it, which is very nice and uses annotations. Python, most people I know will reach for PyTest, and PyTest is made of magic and is beautiful and has the best error messages of any testing framework I've ever seen, and so on. And so we're saying, like, the problem is, it's like landing in when you land in a new country, it's not just that you don't speak the language, it's you don't know what their equivalent is for the thing you have at home.
What's the idiomatic way of doing it?
Yeah, right. Well, how do we even do this? So I registered howtotdd.in. And so then it's going to be just really simple static website, howtotdd.in/Rust.
Nice.
Howtotdd.in/Python. And it will be, look, right, you got a long road ahead of you. If you're just starting Python, you've got a long and very fun road ahead of you. I want to get you out the gate with doing TDD. And what I figured is that my acceptance criteria for each language isn't going to be, this is the boilerplate you need. That's what I thought it was going to be. I thought I'll just start with, in Rust, you're going to want like a main.rs, and then you're going to want your module, and then you're going to want to put some test code and whatever. Is what I want to do is get you from 0 to into your TDD cycle. Mm-hmm. So it won't be detailed like how to install Go or whatever. I'll just link to that. So once you've got this stuff, what are the steps that you need? So you've now got your first failing and then passing test. Right. Okay, you're off. You've got it from here. Yeah, there's other frameworks. Yeah, there's other tools, but this will get you out the gate.
Yeah.
So you have this domain name, and is that what is going to make you do the rest of the work?
No, telling you.
Okay. Saying it publicly.
On your podcast, saying it publicly.
I'll do the Kotlin page for you. So
okay,
well, absolutely right. So how to TDD in Kotlin it's gorgeous. So certainly what I did TDD in Kotlin is I just use JUnit. I use just the Jupyter, the org.JUnit.
Yeah.
But with the Kotlin backticks, and it's so lovely.
Yeah.
It's just really lovely to read, and I've dropped Hamcrest in there, and it's just like being in Kansas. But just with better way, with nicer whatever affordances. So, and the fun thing will be that it's all open source. Obviously, the website itself is just a Hugo static website.
Yeah, easy.
I put that on. It's on GitHub.com/tastapod/howtotdd in, I think, or something like that. How to TDD.
Nice. So I'll send you a pull request.
Exactly right. Anyone can fork it. Anyone can send a PR. Give me your favorite language. We'll have a little chat about whether we think this is actually the best advice to give someone new to your town, or whether it assumes. So something like Scala, which is this incredibly unopinionated language, right? You can write pretty much any possible programming paradigm in Scala. How do you get started with TDD? Yeah. Ask 5 Scala people, get 7 answers, right?
Yeah.
So I don't actually know. It might be, how to TDD.in/Scala/ using this thing,
right,
using another thing.
The variants.
7 sub pages. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I'm certainly going to be opinionated. I'm going to be a benevolent dictator on that site. I'm not just going to accept PRs. I'm going to say, well, James, is this how we would want someone coming to Kotlin to get out of the gate idiomatically in a way that they're going to feel happy?
Yeah, and I think your target is really people that show up in this very, very foreign land and have no idea any of the pieces. And so just helping them get oriented and get going, because it's much better to get them going.
Familiar with TDD, right? So they're really comfy with RSpec in Ruby. And they come to Python and they look for maybe a BDD style given when then style frame. And there's a bunch of them. and none of them are PyTest.
Yeah, interesting.
And PyTest is lovely, and start there. Right?
Yeah.
And likewise, going from Python to Ruby, say, which are arguably not dissimilar languages to get started in, at least. That I would I wouldn't start with unit test in Ruby. I'd always start with RSpec because everyone uses it. It's the lingua franca.
Yeah.
So it's how to it's your little welcome committee into TDD.
There you go.
In a foreign land.
Well, it fits well with the theme of our podcast, which is about the happy path. And how do we get people onto the happy path, but make that the easy path too?
Right.
Because so many times the happy path, and I think this is very true for testing, is that the happy path is not the easy path. It's like to be able to set up your tests and get going, testing something in some kind of foreign language, foreign tooling system. It oftentimes is really challenging. So doing testing is the happy path. How do we get more people onto that path out of the gate than them having to at some point circle back around to it and wander around in the forest for a while?
And the other part of this, which I'm not going to tackle, but I do want to mention, is there's the second loop of having an app deployed and running.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I want to do in order to set up my environment, if you like, to do good work. So I'm starting a new Java app, or I'm starting a new Kotlin app, or whatever it is I want to start with I call it a dancing skeleton. So it's a walking skeleton, but I'm not thinking about the architecture necessarily of the app. I'm thinking about its path to live. So I have something that is in an environment that is representative of what it's going to look like, that I can prod, that I can make do things. And once I have that loop, I then have a TDD loop of behavior within a push and build type loop of seeing what it's like when it's deployed. Mm-hmm. Once I have those two pieces in place, I'm pretty confident that I can make quite fast progress.
You can iterate forward. Are you familiar with Cookie Cutter?
What's Cookie Cutter?
It's a Python.
I know the term, but I don't know the.
It's a Python project. You've got your door is opening. Oh, okay. I don't know what's going on there, but anyway, it's a Python project.
My wonderful son has just come home, and he likes to come in and say hi to Daddy.
Oh,
I see.
Nice.
And
we may have a visitor.
Awesome.
It's what it does is it says, "Oh, you want to do this thing with this, often maybe it's with a framework or some sort of library or whatever. Here is a cookie cutter starting point that you can lay down. And this thing will generate it for you and it'll get it working. And then you can iterate on it. So it's pretty much the same kind of thing that you're talking about.
Now, you see, without looking at it, I can't say. My concern would be, my fear would be, that the cookie that it cuts flies in the face of how I typically end up writing stuff.
Right, so you can create your own. It's an open system.
And this is the thing: is mostly, and in my Cupid article, I talk about, and this is about domain-based structuring your code in a domain-based way. Mm-hmm. Is that most frameworks and cookie cutter tools and whatever, they will say, okay, so you're in MVC type of setup. So here's your models and your views and your controllers and your helpers, and this is where they're all going to live. Mm-hmm. And that's not how I want the code to be. I know there will be models and views and controllers and helpers. It may well be that the models, views and controllers and helpers for my initial features or use cases or whatever sit in the same source file, right? They're not going to be very big. I don't like the artificial seam of having to put these things in a place where, but essentially, when I look at the code, I don't want to see the framework. I want to see the domain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so that typically means that every cookie is going to be different, right? If it can give me an empty hello world thing with that path to live, right? I'm super excited about that, but that tends not to be what the cookie that it cuts. The cookie that it cuts is the flat app, but with opinions about where all the stuff's going to live.
Yeah, this is about the cutting of the cookie and not the cookie itself. So you say, here's what I want, and you make your own cookie, and you make it the way you want, and then you can point people to it and say, well, here's the way I can get started for this kind of a problem. So anyway,
I really like this framing around the feedback piece, because I think this is something we don't think enough about in generally with developer experience things, is that feedback, I love that we started here, because like feedback is so important to what we do as developers. And the way that I see it, I'm going to change metaphors, but the way I see it is like an onion, where we've got like this inner feedback loop, which for me oftentimes is my IDE, like giving me red squigglies. And then I've got like the next layer of the onion, which is like running the app or running my tests or doing both at the same time. But like no, the next layer is like usually the compiler for me, the compiler telling me that my program compiles. Then the next loop is actually running my tests or running my program in some way. So I've got this like layers of an onion. The next one would be like actually doing CI on this thing. So that's giving me some other feedback. And then the like outermost layer is my production system. And at each of those, I have different latencies in my feedback cycle. And so I want to try to keep as much of my work in the lowest latency system, because if the only feedback that I'm getting is in production, that's a really high and challenging area to get good feedback from, and take
expensive.
That feedback, and expensive and all that. And so we're trying to like minimize be at the center of the onion as much as we possibly can.
So I'm going to say yes, and what we want to do is interweave these technical and social feedback loops. So for sure, I can get feedback on whether I'm making progress in the direction I want. It's not until it's in front of someone that I know whether that's the direction I should be going. Right?
Yep.
So, the getting stuff out and getting feedback, even though it has the appearance of higher latency, it's actually a shorter path to getting useful feedback about direction.
Yeah, and this is where like the waterfall versus agile, whatever, comes into play, because you could spend years in a very tight feedback system loop, building something that is technically wonderful, and then years later you finally get it out there to your users and they're like, yeah, that's not at all.
And I would argue that the point of Agile, the problem that they were actually trying to solve, was a feedback problem.
Well, so this is great. So I've said this a number of times. I describe Agile as three things: work in small chunks, get feedback, take engineering seriously. Right, that's it. And then I bookend this by saying, if anyone tells you it's less than this, they don't understand Agile. If anyone tells you it's more than this, they're selling you something.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd almost want to do a cold start and just say, okay, here's Dan's rules for programming life, rather than trying to. I feel like
I don't really call it Agile. I just call it effective delivery. So what I want is to be able to do things well, do things quickly, and learn quickly whether they're useful things.
I think attaching it to Agile might be problematic at this point. I would say effective delivery or something like that. Okay, that's.
I like that you brought together the two sides of those feedback systems, and that they have to work together. You could, like, having just one of the social or technical, like, you're not going to get to where you want to go. You really need both systems. You need them to work well together.
Well, right. and this is so Jeff Patton, who's just one of my favorite human beings. He very early on, he said he had a real disconnect with, for him it was XP, but just the Agile world in general. He said he didn't get it. He said, I'm a programmer and I know exactly what I want. And he said, and XP told me that I was either the customer, which is the subject matter expert, or I'm the programmers. And he said, and I was told to pick a side. And so I picked the customer side because we had enough programmers. and it just seems to me like a really false dichotomy. And Scrum, again, you've got the product owner and the team members, and what you actually want is people who are able to grok a domain, understand a domain deeply, understand the needs of people in that domain, and understand what service you're trying to provide, what needs you're trying to meet in jobs theory language, what job it is to be done, what's the job that your product does, and then to be able to go ahead and make a product that does that job. Right? And it's I've never understood why we think that it's two different sets of people or types of people who would have both the various sides of that conversation.
Well, one of the things I like, I don't know if it was one or multiple of your presentations you talked about, you said the whole point of this is to produce business impact.
Yes, sustainably minimize lead time to business impact. I've worked really hard on that phrase. So it's also so the way I describe it is this: lead time is the only game in town. Okay, so lead time is, I'm sure there are many technical definitions. Lead time for me is the wall clock time, the elapsed time from James saying I need a thing to James saying thank you. Right, that's it. So I could be shipping loads of stuff, and if he hasn't said thank you yet, I haven't got it right. It's only when he says thank you that I get to stop the clock. And then, so we want to minimize that lead time. And then I tack on the word sustainably, because it's pretty easy to minimize lead time to business impact once, right? And you do that just by burning everyone out, maybe twice, right? By that time, everyone's quit. So the sustainably piece causes you to think about, how do we do this in a way that the human beings involved in this enterprise can continue to do this? And that's where you get into ideas like joy, happiness, collaboration, all of Dan Pink's, autonomy, mastery, purpose, that sense of being part of a bigger thing. And if you don't create those things, you get mediocre products and high attrition.
I gotta say, I've been thinking about this, even though, God, who knows what the possibilities are at this point. But I've started thinking, there's a part of my life that's not fulfilled that would be by actually, building things rather than just thinking about how everybody else builds things. And the only thing that comes to me is like, it's not about the money. It's about the quality of the experience. It's about I had one consulting customer that ruined me for everybody else because they were so great to work with. And I came away with that going, how do I only have customers like that? And or whatever experience it is. And it's like and so all of those other things that have quote unquote nothing to do with programming, those are the things that are important to me. It's like the human interaction, the stimulation, the lack of somebody standing there with a whip saying we got to get it out now. It's like, well, but do those things even exist, and how do you find them?
Well, I worked with a wonderful lady some years ago who was she's one of these superbly nebulous transformation type titles. And she'd chosen this superbly nebulous transformation title because it meant she could just run around, cause all kinds of mischief, and no one really knew what she did. And she described her job as, I want the people around me to have a better day today than they had yesterday. That's it. If the people around me are having a better day today than they had yesterday, everything else will follow from that. Customers will be happier, products will be better, technology, technical choices will be. All of the things that we think matter come from, again, autonomy, mastery, purpose, come from, and I'm a massive, massive fan of Amy Edmondson, Professor Amy Edmondson, psychological safety. The sense that asking questions isn't ignorance. Asking questions is learning.
Yes.
Challenging the status quo isn't causing trouble. It's wanting to improve things. Asking for help. Right? Asking for help isn't incompetence. It's collaboration. And that shift of asking for help, asking questions, and challenging things is and side note, most people I see talking about or writing about psychological safety, I don't think they've actually read what it is. They've just heard the words. And, this idea, so psychological safety isn't about, it's about interpersonal intimacy, interpersonal vulnerability, particularly interpersonal vulnerability in a professional context.
You mean like, well, I mean, I still have to tell myself, no, you need to ask the question. If you're in the middle of a conversation at a conference and people start using acronyms, or they start assuming that everybody knows what's going on and I don't, there's always a little hesitation. I'm going, because there's the voice that says, oh, but they'll know that you don't know what you're talking about. And I have to go, that's okay. This conversation is pointless if I continue to smile and nod. Ask the question.
And there's a wonderful XKCD about this, and it's this idea that you say, "Oh, I can't believe, surely you know about this thing." And Randall Schwartz, he says, he takes all this he does this wonderful Venn diagram of amount of things that people learn in a day, amount of things that people learn in their life, and the amount of things there are, kind of thing. And he says, on average, most people are learning X new things each day. And so what? And I've trained myself to do this, and it is an active thing. Is that when you discover that someone doesn't know something that everyone knows, then my response is, "Oh, cool! I get to be the person who tells you about." Right? Surely everyone knows that this. Everyone knows about PyTest, and anyone coding in Python knows about PyTest. And you find someone who's been using Python for years and they've not come across PyTest, and you're like, man, I'm going to make your day. Let me show you this thing. Let me show you how fun this is. And you just watch their eyes light up and you go, I did that.
So, all right, let's get into this kerfuffle that you've started about Cupid.
Sorry.
I mean, you stepped in it. You might as well. You've got to own it.
I know. And again, it was... so a bit more context, James. So when I met Bruce, I started writing a book called Software Faster in about 2011, 2012. So it's a 10-year labor of love. Still about less than a quarter complete. And one of the many conversations we had during that wonderful day we spent together was, would you be a editor reviewer on my book? And he said, I'd love to be an editor reviewer on your book. Start sending me stuff. How much stuff have I sent you, Bruce?
You may have sent me something that I didn't attend to.
I'm going to go with the Douglas Adams, none at all. Oh,
well, that's a relief. Okay.
No, you're fine.
I've ensured my responsibilities.
You are totally off the hook. No, I have this aspiration to write this book. And I now have a brilliant co-author who is chasing me, and she's wonderful. Helen Scott. So she's, but yeah. So meanwhile, someone pokes me with a stick and says, "What about this solid thing then?" And then suddenly I write this, 5,000 word Cupid article and do a series of talks about it, and it's completely broadsided my Software Faster. But the fun thing is that now, as we're writing new chapters, we're referencing Cupid, so it's all intertwingles.
So I get to ask the dumb question of what is solid.
Okay, so about 100 years ago, or sometime in the medieval, in the Middle Ages, a chap called Robert Martin, who
refers
also
to himself as Uncle Bob.
Uncle Bob. He's actually, to be fair, so he's the cause of Agile. Agile is his fault. And the reason it's his fault is in the late 90s, early 2000s, a bunch of independent folks, or a bunch of folks were independently going around working in small chunks, getting feedback, taking engineering seriously in different ways. And they all had various competing or rival methodologies. There was Peter Code's feature-driven design. There was Crystal. There was Scrum. There was Adaptive. There was XP. Loads of these different things. And Bob Martin sort of went through his Rolodex and he said, right, let's get everyone in a room and see if we can come up with like a branding term for this thing that we've got in common. And that was the Snowbird conference, and that was where the term agile came from.
I was invited to, but I said, well, who's going to pay for me to come? I'm certainly not going to pay for myself. This was before I understood.
Right.
So I missed out.
I missed out.
Well, and being a middle-aged white guy, you'd have fit right in, right? Mm-hmm. Because so were these 17 participants, which says a lot for diversity of Rolodexes. But so something that he'd done sometime before was this. He'd come up with a load of principles of good object-oriented code, and Mike Feathers, who was working with him at Object Mentor, he noticed that if you took the first 5 of these and changed the order slightly, you could create the acronym SOLID.
Okay.
Which was fun. And so they are, very briefly, single responsibility principle. So the canonical definition, I've done loads of reading on this. The canonical definition, code should have one reason to change, right? And so the examples are things like if you have some kind of form, then the code that is the data for the form or the business rules for the form should be separate from the code that is the view for the form and how you present it, for instance. O is open-close principle, of which there are 2 rival versions, but by and large, code should be open for extension and closed for modification. And what it really means is that the extension points of code should be really obvious. Right? Add your stuff here, don't touch that bit.
Okay.
L is Liskov substitutability principle, so the idea that you should be able to drop in subtypes in the place of supertypes and no one should notice terribly much, or at least there shouldn't be any unpleasant surprises. I is, now what's this one now? Interface segregation principle, which is if you have a massive God object with hundreds of responsibilities, instead, what you should have is it should implement a number of small opinionated interfaces, and you should just talk through those interfaces. And D is then dependency inversion, which is, don't call us, we'll call you. So these were the 5. And where this started...
That was well done.
Thank you very
much. There's a lot of things that I know well and would not be able to come up with.
A lot of time on this.
Yeah.
I've been way too close to this. So the crazy thing here was, and all of this starts as, what I have now with Cupid is life imitating satire. Right? This isn't even life imitating, it's life imitating satire. So I got invited to speak at one of these Ignite style, 5-minute talks, 20 slides, auto advancing, 15 seconds. And the only rules were, so it takes place in a pub. The only rules are it has to be about computering and it has to be funny. Right? So I was like, okay, great. And I can't remember why Solid was front of mind, but it just popped into my head. And I thought, this talk writes itself, right? One slide about what the thing is, one slide about why I disagree with it, one slide about what I do instead. 5 times, that's 15 slides. Top and tail it, you're done. Nice. I said, I'm going to talk about why every single element of Solid is wrong. And so they said, okay, that sounds fun. And so I started writing this talk, and then a weird thing happened. Is I thought I'd come up with some kind of counter for each thing, and it's actually pretty easy to drive a truck through each of these things. It turns out, and then what? Oh man, I'll tell you what. Though, after this went out, the software craftsmen, they came for me with pitchforks. They were like, oh yeah, effigies, you name it.
Yeah. Don't talk bad about our beloved Solid.
No,
right?
There is a blog post out there called "Why Every Single Element of Dan North Is Wrong." I mean, this is ad hominem to the max. This guy was really pissed. Anyway, and he wonderfully misrepresents all of it. But I won't anyway. I don't want to name it. It's out there if you care. So what I found is this: each time my counter for each of the 5 things was to just write simple code. And obviously, I need to be able to stand behind that. What do you mean by simple code? Everyone's idea of simple is different. Simple code is code that will fit in someone's head. And the someone isn't me or you. The someone is anyone who understands pretty much kind of idiomatic the code in play.
Well, I think you used the word inhabitable, which I liked.
Well, so that comes along later on. Habitable is what's his name? Which what happens when you're recording live.
Christopher Alexander?
No. Right, and
is the eye one of the Cupid things? So your better
Gabriel,
solid is Cupid.
Is Cupid? Yes, right. So exactly, you're getting a little ahead. So Dick Gabriel, Richard Gabriel in 96 or something, mid-90s. He writes this wonderful, wonderful series of articles called Patterns of Software, and one of them is called Habitability and Piecemeal Growth. And it's just beautiful. So if you go to, so the other thing I'm building at the moment, and another one of my side projects, is I've taken this Cupid article and busted out into the 5 component pieces and put it on a website called cupid.dev. So cupid.dev is, hopefully it's going to be a little bit more styled than it is now. Right now it's just the text. It's got no pictures or anything, which just makes it a bit easier to navigate the content. But habitability comes later. No, so fits in my head is as long as you understand. So say it's a Kotlin code base. If you understand idiomatic Kotlin, simple means you can look at this and you can get it. It's really no more sophisticated than that. If you look at it and you're scratching your head because it's clever, air quotes clever. Someone's done this in a clever way using language, monkey patching in an OO language when you could just use object composition. It's just self-harm. So I said, for instance, single responsibility. I'm like, well, no, just write simple code, right? If at the stage you are with the code you've got, it makes sense to have the content of the form, the source of the form, the business rules of the form, and the display of the form in one place as one thing, then you should just have that. Dogs coming in and out of rooms. Then and so saying that you should keep these things separate is a premature optimization of code structure. That's really what it is. It's asym. It's an option. Let's let the code base get a bit messy and then see where it wants to break. It may want to break along domain boundaries and keep all of the form stuff together and have all of the authentication stuff in a different place.
Yeah.
It may be that I do want to put all my controllers together for some reason about controllers or about deployability or something. But I'll figure that out. I don't want to decide that a priori.
This reminds me of, so there's the microservice design patterns from, oh my God, having those brain freezes today. But anyways, so one of them says that microservice is a design pattern, and monolithic architecture is also a design pattern. But people really want to know, like, should I use just microservices or should I just use monolithic? Like, people ask that question all the time. And
what is
the answer is, it depends. And I think that, like, we just don't like for the answer to be it depends, because it's too ambiguous. It's uncomfortable.
And concurrency is shot full of all of that stuff. It's like, well, how do I write a concurrent program?
Yeah.
Well, depends on what problem you're trying to solve.
Exactly. It depends. And so I think, like you're saying, is like really it should depend on a lot of factors how you decide to break your code up. But we want to be able to say, nope, always do model view controller, whatever it is, just because that's the simple thing, but often doesn't make sense.
And I find that really confusing.
Chris Richardson is the person. Sorry.
Who said that? But
Chris Richardson.
Yeah, that kind of thing is really confusing. It's like when model view controller was introduced, I was going, why would I do it that well? This is
because
the way
solid,
it's done.
Bruce. Because solid.
Yeah.
Well, now hang on. So let me leap to the defense of MVC, because again, this is something I was looking up recently. It turns out that we're all doing that wrong. Right?
Of course.
With so many things. People
you should be doing VVM or whatever it is.
Well, not even that.
React just like blew up the whole thing.
So the original MVC, the idea of having a domain model and some projection of that domain model and something that arbitrates between those things, that's a micro design pattern.
Yeah.
The idea is that every single one of your page fragments or view fragments should have model view controller. It should represent some domain construct, and the domain construct in a model, and then you've got the view that's the rendering of that. And so then your page is made up of lots and lots of these M's and V's and C's going around in little gangs.
Yeah.
And we end up with, the page view.
The page being the single MVC.
So we have this macro view thing.
Instead of domain-centric, you make it page-centric.
Right. And so now suddenly, you have the controller for this page. And that was never the intent. Huh. So I think model view presenter is probably the closest thing. But even then, when you have lots of tiny components. But so someone asked me in the last few days, actually, they said me that they emailed me and they said, this is how I write software, and what do you think? And basically what they said is, I look at the requirements, or I look at the problem statement, and I take out all the nouns, and I start with all the nouns, and I make entities out of all the nouns. I'm like, okay. And then then what I do is I look for all the verbs, and they become methods on the. And I just read this thing through, and I was like, okay, this is probably how I was taught how this stuff as well, 30 odd years ago. No, I said, no, this is not what I do. So I then spent, but I should probably blog this. But so I'll just read a couple of fragments from my reply to him. I said, I start with the problem statement like you, and I describe the high level use cases or user journeys, and I decide which ones I'm going to start with. Huh. Right? Nothing else matters. That's the entire world now. And then, and this goes back to the dancing skeleton, I try to get anything end-to-end working and deployed. This can be a simple hello world in an environment where I can exercise the code, right? So this causes me to set up my basic tooling and build. And then I say, I model the flow for just the initial use case I'm looking at, but I always start with behavior rather than entities. And it may be that I can get the behavior I want in one monolithic block of code, and that's fine, right, to start with. And then this goes back to your it depends, because I don't want to be the it depends guy or girl, right? I don't want to be the person who's like, it depends. And it's like, I saw this at an Agile conference once. Oh man, a very famous Agile person, luminary type person, and someone, just like dewy-eyed, never heard of Agile before. They've been sent there by their manager, and they ran up and they said, so what is Agile then? What is it? I've been to all these talks. I still can't get my head around what is Agile. And they said, it's whatever you want it to be.
Well,
and I was like, kind of, yeah, and kind of I want to punch you in the face.
Yeah, those things, both of those things.
And you just want to shake and say, look, just give this person something to work in small chunks, get feedback, take engineering seriously, whatever it is, right? Just here's something to go away and start with. So if I say it depends, I always, this is like note to self, to at least say on what.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yes. There you go.
And so then I say,
give some framing.
Yeah. So what I said to this chap in reply, I said, I try to let the use cases guide the architecture. If it feels like a message or event-based architecture, I tend towards small message-based components. But they might all be in a single monolith. I might be using some Go routines or something like that. It doesn't have to be separate pieces. If it feels more synchronous, like a user does a thing that causes a linear sequence of events that can end up back at the user, or a payload hits an endpoint and some synchronous processing takes place, I might just go down that controller service repository type thing.
Yeah.
Right? But the use case tells me the shape it wants to be.
Yeah, it's making me think, I think this is another example of where we're saying, well, I need to know what the pieces are before I can write the program.
Yes.
And it's actually, no, you have to try and write the program, and then that reveals what the pieces are, and maybe it's...
Well, and in fact, it's more than that. I would say that they co-create.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's as the pieces emerge, they inform what it is you're building. And this is why, back to the earlier conversation with James, this is why we need to get the social feedback loop in with the technical feedback loop. Because I've started framing this in terms of product management, and particularly in terms of jobs to be done. So I don't know if you come across jobs to be done, Clay Christensen. And so he uses it all starts, in my mind at least, this isn't, in my mind, it all starts with that lovely phrase, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. right? So it's what's the outcome that I want. So Ted Levitt,
but I'm a drill guy.
Levitt. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not. Just, I might want a 1/4 inch hole, but I also want to collect some pretty cool power tools. If I can excuse to get a new power tool because you want a 1/4 inch hole, I'll get the power tool. No, and so they said people don't want a product; they want what the product does for them, and they call this the job to be done. So in their language, you hire a product, and you hire the product to do the job. And if you can find a product that does the job better or fits your model better, you're going to use that other product. And the way that the Clay Christensen, there's lots of different churches of this, but the way the Clay Christensen world looks at this is you have what they call your current state and your desired state, your goal state. And the goal state might be a social thing. I want to have more status. The goal state might be a financial thing. It might want financial stability. It might be a capability. I want to be able to do a thing that I couldn't do or have an experience that I haven't had. And the idea, and then you define a product as something that helps you make progress from where you are to where you want to be. Now, hold that thought, because if we're now talking about building a product that gets me from where I am to where I want to be, as I set out on that journey, because you're offering me a product that helps me, my goal might change. Right? I start at A, I want to go to B. Right? I want to go to B. And on my way, I suddenly realized that actually I'd be much happier at C. Now, one of two things happens. You can double down with your product and be amazing at getting me to B, and it's now still the wrong product. And then you get really frustrated and cross with me, and the users are wrong and everything's, because we're making this product better and better, and we're losing all our customers, right? Because the goal changed and we didn't notice. Or because I have that social feedback, I understand that the customer product feedback, I understand that the goal has changed, and I adapt my product now to help you make progress from where you are, which is like some A prime or whatever, towards C. So you end up with like this set of kind of micro corrections all the way through. And that, if we're not building products with that mindset, we are doomed to build the wrong thing with the best of intentions.
So, but I've visualized that product and I have become attached to, and this actually segues into your book, because, we could throw a monkey wrench in and we're going, well, are you really creating a book, or is a book just some artifact that you've become attached to? And maybe maybe what you really need to create is something else. And I'm much better at pointing this out for other people than realizing it for myself.
Right, and you you wouldn't be the first person who's asked this question. So I think for me, software faster is and I'm always wary about using fancy words with my own stuff, but it feels like a canon. It feels like a bunch of a body of work. And in actual fact, it feels like several bodies of work, related bodies of work. So what I did really early on, back up. 2010, 2011, I was working with a very unusual team. By far the most high-performing software team I've ever encountered. There are many stories I could tell you about this team. The best way to describe it, though, is having spent best part of a decade in agile land, and to some extent shaping agile land. When I joined this team, who were head and shoulders more, not just faster at output, better quality output, better suited to their customers. It was trading software inside a trading firm, directly with traders. And the feedback loop, put it like this, the business case was easy. Did it make money? Right? Can we change it so it makes more money? Right? Or did it lose not as much money as the other thing lost money? But then, the ramifications of that, it has to be incredibly easy to use, because the one thing you don't want as a trader is to be looking at stale information on a screen, or to be having to think about the tool rather than about trading. Right? So suddenly UX is a big deal. The rate of change is a big deal. You might see a trading opportunity that is going to last for a number of hours. Right? If you don't jump on that, then it doesn't matter. If we ship it next week, it's too late. Right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, the thing I had after a few months in this team was culture shock. I went into a depression. I went in a real kind of crisis of, I don't even know how to write software. I don't know what I'm doing here. Mm-hmm. And part of it was that my superpowers by this point, when I left ThoughtWorks, were about tackling complex organization management and trying to push open doors. And this trading firm had the most ridiculously enlightened managers. Say, we need to do this thing, and they'd say, well, you should go ahead and do that thing then. You're like, what? Wait, I'm totally prepared for this conversation. Yeah, I know, but you should just go and do that thing. Are you a grown-up? Yes, get on with it.
I don't have any objections to you doing that thing.
Yeah.
No, not even. I don't have any objections. How can I help you? If you think that's the thing you do, how do we help you? I'm like, man, this isn't so. None of my superpowers worked. They were all redundant. And so being part of this team, and I'm sure, Bruce, you'll recognize this. When you're in a situation, you're being in the situation. You're being Bruce. Sitting there, cutting code or pairing with people or coaching or whatever it is you're doing. You're also observing you in that situation. Mm-hmm. You're saying, is there, what of this is situational here? And what of this could I maybe share, articulate, communicate? What am I learning here that maybe I could generalize? And so I started doing that. And that was basically my coping mechanism, was is this just a one-off and you just have to hire this team? Or are these folks doing something, but it is so not what the Agile folks are doing? It's so counter to that, but it is still its own, I can still articulate these things.
Would you say that the problems that Agile is designed to solve were already solved in that situation?
Well, so this is, and I think there's a tacit assumption there that I want to tease out. What are the problems that Agile is designed to solve? And this, again, is one of the reasons why, and I've said this many times, you can't scale Agile. You can create agility at scale, but you can't scale Agile. They're different things. And Agile methods, all of the Agile methods, practically, there's one or two exceptions, all of the Agile methods were designed to help team scale delivery suck less.
So it's defined as a negative.
Well, it's defined as it's trying to get work done, right? Mm. If you have an on-site customer or you have an embedded product owner or whatever it is, if you have domain knowledge, subject matter expertise in the team, you can shorten feedback loops. If you work in stories or features or whatever they might be, little chunks of work rather than huge line items on a Gantt chart, then it means you can get feedback sooner and you can course correct. So it was for this kind of world. And, at that time, and again, we've got to put this in a historical context, in the kind of mid-90s, the very fact of getting 8 or 10 people pointing in the same direction, given that those 8 or 10 people often were in different departments, maybe different time zones, right? Cross-functional teams were completely heretical for the longest time. Anyone who's been in software for less than 25 years has never experienced that. For the longest time, people, you would have, the wonderful, and you look at some of these 70s software models, like Barry Boehm's the spiral model, and you look at the spiral, and basically it's analyze, design, develop, build, right? Deploy, and that makes perfect sense until you look at the legend on that diagram, and it says this is an 18-month cycle, right?
Interesting.
And then the V model that says start with, at the point when you're doing your requirements, write your acceptance tests. Hey, that's a really good idea. When you get into your detailed design, write your unit tests. Man, you guys are rocking this. And then again, now you get into code, right? and then you look at that V model and it says 2 years.
Wow.
Okay, so then if you look at agility as shortening that feedback time, so instead of 18 months, I want it to be 18 minutes, right? And instead of 2 weeks, I want it to be 2 years. I want it to be 2 weeks, or maybe even 2 hours. Yeah. Then they were right.
Yeah.
But the constraints, the physical, technological constraints in which they were operating, 18 months was considered pretty crazy.
Right.
If you're at Boeing or wherever Barry Boehm was, these massive engineering firms, an 18-month cycle, you're challenging a status quo that talks in decade cycles.
Yep.
And this crazy upstart was talking 18 months. Right? Royce talking about 2 years was just revolutionary. And then when you get someone like Martine DeVos, who's one of the very early Scrum pioneers, and she's saying, right, instead of delivering an 18-month feature, we're going to ship something in 12 weeks, or I'm going to kill people. and then she says, and we're not just going to fly blind for 12 weeks like we usually do. We're going to showcase something in 6 weeks. We're going to course correct. And so that's all she said. She said, we're going to do is we're going to have a showcase after 6 weeks. We're going to release in 12 weeks. Doesn't matter what it is, but it's going to be non-zero. And everything else in Scrum follows from that one constraint, right? If you have monthly steering and you have 6 weeks, you're going to land 1 or maybe 2 steering meetings in that. So that's not going to help, right? In 18 months, I've had 18. What if I did it every week? Well, it's still only 6. What if I did daily steering, daily micro steering? Okay, let's do that. Right? I just invented the stand-up. No one told me, but I just... Right, if this feature goes from desk to desk to desk through the organization for 8 months, Martine's going to kill us after 6 weeks. What do we need to do? We need to go and get, Bruce the tester. We need to go and get James the systems analyst. We need to go and get, Dan the programmer. And we need to put these people at the same desk, man. If we don't put them at the same desk, we cannot possibly ship something in 6 weeks. Right, I just invented co-located. No one told me to co-locate teams. They just said Martine's going to be really cross in 6 weeks if you don't show her something. Yeah. And so if you look at all of the stuff that became, ritual or canon or baked in stone or whatever with Scrum, it was simply, can we ship something noticeable in 6 weeks? And everything else follows from that. And then the historical projection bit, and this again comes back to Solid being stuck in time. Scrum is equally stuck in time. A 2-week planning cadence. Well, the original sprints were 6 weeks, but that goes down to 4 weeks to 3 weeks. Nowadays, mostly it's 2 or 3 weeks. Having a 2 or 3 week planning horizon makes sense when you're going to do a 12-week release, right? Having a 2 or 3 week planning horizon when I can ship 15 different builds in a morning onto servers that I don't even own. Who on earth is going to wait for 2 weeks for feedback? That's crazy. Yeah. Our competitors have done 5 releases in that time and taken our market share. Yeah. Right. So now I talk about the only reasonable planning horizons are quarterly, because that gives us things to aim for, and now. There is no reasonable planning horizon between in the moment and quarterly that makes any sense at all.
So let me ask you a final question, because we're reaching our end.
Oh man, I'm just getting started.
I know. We could definitely go on I'm going to just have to send you my list of meta problems.
I'd be more than happy to do this again. This is too much fun.
Well, that's true. We could do that, but I still want to send you that list.
Please send me your meta list.
Yeah,
I would be very happy.
So what? Okay, and I'll, in the process of preparing for this, many things came up for me, and when I thought of this question, I thought, well, what's mine? And I realized that I had defined my professional goal in the terms of a negative, which was that I didn't want to be boxed in by anything. And I made all my decisions based on that, but it was much harder to do that. It was much harder to say, oh, well, does this box me in or not? And it's it doesn't tell me what I want. It tells me what I don't want. So what is your general professional goal?
And please frame it in terms of a negative.
Yeah.
Well, so I can give you a positive framing for your negative. There's wonderful language from the world of NLP. That they call away from and towards motivation. Mm-hmm. So you can have away from motivation. I don't want to be boxed in.
Right.
And then towards motivation might be I want to be known for significant contributions in a number of different areas. Mm-hmm. And both of those are completely. And what tends to happen is when someone's in an unpleasant situation, most of their motivation is going to be away from.
Sure.
When you ask them, what do you want? Oh, I don't want a crappy boss. I don't want to work long hours. I don't want to be whatever it is.
Right.
But once they've got a bit of headspace, you say, what do you want? Wow, do you know, actually, now I've had a good night's sleep, there are so many things that I could frame in a positive light. Mm-hmm. And so now we talk about the away from motivation and the towards motivation, and then we can start to build a profile. What I've found is, and I'm afraid I'm going to give you a really rubbish answer because I don't have an answer for that. Mm-hmm. I did a joint talk with a wonderful lady called Trisha G some years ago. She's awesome. Brilliant Java programmer, been a developer advocate at JetBrains for 100 years. Has written some proper low latency, electronic exchange type software. She's got props. She's got props. Anyway, we got chatting about careers, and we discovered that we had these like diametrically opposed. So she's kind of, I want to be here in 3 years. Therefore, I need these skills or this experience. Therefore, my next move will be that. Therefore, that's... And she was like absolutely clinical about where she was going. And I was kind of, that looks interesting. I'm going to go over there. Or, this thing lands in my lap and I'm basically lazy. So I'll go do that next. And so I've mostly been... I've been super lucky since I went independent, which was about 10 years now. All my work's been inbound. So people contact me and they say, can you help? I've seen your talk about this, or someone recommended you to do that. And so I would describe the last decade or so as just a series of adventures. Mm-hmm. And there's none of them I would have planned. Mm-hmm. From coaching little consultancies to being emailed by, ultra wealthy individuals who run entire business empires and saying, why don't you come and have a chat? And it's like, so
these opportunities for adventure emerge in front of you, and then
absolutely.
You're like,
and what
chase that.
Sorry, go on. Yeah, well, let's chase that, or let's explore that. And the thing I think certainly not necessarily the thing I go towards, but my heuristic, if you like, my yardstick, my moral compass, or whatever we're going to call it. I want to be doing things that interest me. I want to be doing things that are, net positive in the world. I want to be working with lovely people. Right back to your comment right at the beginning, Bruce. Mm-hmm. We had this wonderful client. Once you've had a wonderful client, once you've worked with wonderful people, why would you not do that? Why would you not choose to do that? And so I have fired clients, sometimes very explicitly, sometimes very subtly, where I just was not having fun, where there's just, either the direction you're taking I don't agree with, or the people you've got, this isn't working. Likewise, and again, this is accidental, but now it's becoming more deliberate. On that journey, I've met some wonderful people. And some of those wonderful people I've made, I've gone to lengths to keep close. So there's one brilliant lady I'm working with now, Anna Urbaniak. I've done a couple of talks with her now, and she is just phenomenal. Like, massive brain, totally understands delivery, totally understands kind of flow and how to get software teams of 12 or 120 or 300 or, bunches of people at various different sizes pointing in the same direction and on the same page. And it's just phenomenal to watch her execute it. And why would I not want to work with Anna? Mm-hmm. And when I get another opportunity, and if she's available, why would I not say, hey, Anna, I've got this opportunity. Why don't you come and hang out with me? And I'm super lucky so far. She's mostly said yes. Yeah. And so I think working with people, working with wonderful client people is great. I thought when I first set up as an independent, I called myself Dan North and Associates, assuming that I would build this kind of network of whatever, and maybe build a practice. And I know a lot of folks end up with a practice of maybe 10, 15, 20 people who are like,
there's that public commitment thing again.
Right. And it never happened. And then suddenly in the last, I guess, 3 years, I've now ended up with a small group of people who we kind of are really gelling. Mm-hmm. And I think of it like a band, right? I suspect that this band is going to record other albums. Nice. We are going to go play elsewhere. Mm-hmm. but yeah, it's mostly it's about that lovely phrase about opportunity. The harder I work, the luckier I get, or the more I practice, the luckier I get.
Mm-hmm.
Is I just keep practicing, and I see where it takes me. And I had no idea Cupid was going to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Phil Nash, lovely Phil Nash, says to me, "Well, what would you do instead of Solid?" Then that's a very good question. JB Rainsberger says so. It really sucks that when I get a new technology, I have to learn how to do TDD in it. I was like, you're right. You could fix that.
Yep.
I don't plan any of these things. I just sort of end up. And Douglas Adams in Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency has this wonderful. He describes what he calls holistic driving. Dirk Gently is a holistic detective, which is that he solves crimes based on the interconnectedness of all things. It's a wonderful series of books. But he describes holistic driving, and holistic driving is this: he jumps in the car and sets off in a direction and follows someone until he sees someone who he thinks he should follow more, and he follows them. And he says, I never end up where I thought I was going, and I always end up where I needed to be.
It's what's really fascinating is that I've had this list of questions that I've wanted to ask you, and you have answered them before I've asked them in the flow of the whole thing. And in fact, one of the questions was questions or things I posited was called the goal problem, and I see it in many different ways as we decide the goal and we go, and I do this a lot, I get stuck on it. And I have a friend who teaches writing, and I've made several attempts to write novels. And at one point I decided, well, you have to know where you're going to go. If you're going to write a novel, you have to know where you're going to get to. Sounds good, right? It sounds reasonable. And some writers will tell you this. But then his system is that, no, you don't know where you're going to go. In fact, if you do, that's going to lock you up. That's going to keep you from writing. You have to just start driving.
Yeah.
Right, and there are very different schools of this. So the most famous or for me, the most famous of these is Charles Dickens. Mm-hmm. Where he started writing, is it Nicholas Nickleby? One of his books, he started writing as a series. He just serialized it, and he'd write a chapter at a time.
Because he was getting paid by the magazine.
He was getting paid by the magazine, mm-hmm. right?
Well, that's how I started writing a book. Yeah.
You did it. And then Stephen King famously kind of picked this up and wrote. I can't remember which one it was, but one of his stories as it just published a chapter at a time. And when you first start, you've got no idea where it's going. And then you realize that once you've got a bunch of copy out there, you need to start thinking about keeping it at least consistent and character arcs and all that kind of stuff. Conversely, a good friend of mine is an author, has written a wonderful sci-fi book. And he spent a lot of time with plot arcs, character arcs, backstories, huge amounts of research, tons and tons of material before writing a single word of prose. Now I hear people saying, "Oh, write it, rewrite it, sketch." When I wrote the Cupid article, when I write articles in general, I find that I agonize over each paragraph. Mm-hmm. And by the time I've finished writing, it's about 90% of the way there. It's not very efficient. I'm sure there are fast-paced right, but what I find is it's I really, really struggle with or noodle on exactly what it is I'm trying to say. I want to say it correctly. I want to say the thing right, and I want to say the right thing. And then it'll go through a review cycle, and it'll get much, much tighter. And especially working with a co-author, as I say, is wonderful because she's brutal, and so the chapter we end up with is much better than the chapter I wrote, but the content of it is practically there in the first draft. And I know a lot of people don't write like that and would actively discourage that. So that the goal fixation thing, I think, really is an interesting phenomenon because it's not right or wrong. It's simply useful for some people.
Well, and one of the things, I don't know if you have computer programming is like building a house or being a plumber or, any of those things. and I've struggled with that one. And the only thing that I've come up with is it's actually writing code is like writing. It's like being a writer, which means that you have all of these different styles and struggles and everything that are personal to everybody. And it doesn't.
So the metaphor I was using a while back, I did a talk or a series of talks called Beyond Features, I was likening software to surgery. And the reason I use the metaphor of surgery is this: no one wants surgery. Right? Yep. What they want is to be well. Yeah. What they want is the results of that surgery. And ideally what they want is the results of that surgery with the minimum possible surgery. Right? That's right. And if you approach software in that way, no one wants your fancy patterns and craftsmanship and blah. What they want is the absolutely smallest amount of software to get the job done. And if you can do that with zero software, you win at software. Yep. And now it doesn't mean that you write bad software, right? I still want world-class surgery. I still want a surgeon who has practiced and practiced and practiced and who knows the best techniques and who knows what's appropriate and who won't be surprised when they cut me open. They're not going to go, "Oh, that's odd. I haven't seen that before. What do you think of this? This will make a good case study." Right? I don't want that. I don't want someone who goes, I don't know what. Right? Or what's that squishy thing? I've not seen one of those. Right? Or who says, "I'm going to put this device in you because it's the device I know. Right? I'm going to use this framework because I'm going to make your surgery this shape problem." But I don't want any of that. I want someone who's seen enough surgery, practiced enough surgery that when they look at me, they say, "I can see the shortest path from where we are right now to you are well and going home."
That is an excellent point on which we should finish. Thank you so much for your time, and let's stay in better pleasure. Touch.
Please
stay well. That was super fun. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, folks.